Hello everyone, I'm Neil Lucier, Principal Architect of Segmentation and Cloud at Forescout. I've been with Forescout now for a few years, helping get the eyeSegment product launched and out of the gate, and now working on architecture. Came from industry, 20 years, last 8 years at E-Trade Financial doing security engineering work for them. So great, and starting off here, I'm here with Jordy Davis from the state of Utah. And Jordy, tell us a little bit about yourself and your role.
Right. Jordy Davis, I'm a senior network engineer with the state of Utah, and I'm actually the primary architect dealing with network segmentation and our Forescout deployment at the state.
Excellent. And so you've been with Forescout a little bit already. So what are some of the, what is some of the, we talked a little bit about eyesight already. So what are some of the kind of the visibility and things you got from eyesight, and kind of start off there?
Well, we implemented Forescout with the state about 2.5 going on 3 years now. And when we first put it in place, our discovery of devices, we had NAC solutions in place before. We'd been doing discovery before, trying to detect devices, and our ability to actually detect devices that were on the network improved. When we first purchased Forescout, we looked at it and said, okay, how many devices are we going to have on the network? How many licenses do we need? And we came up with a number, which was, we thought, a pretty good buffer. When we finally implemented Forescout, turned out that number was shy of what we needed. So it ended up being, hey, we have all these other devices that we were learning. And really, when you look at it, devices get on the network, somebody goes and pops a unmanaged switch into your network. They bring in IoT, they bring in their own wireless access points, and you may have a DHCP server adding some of your space to it, but when you start getting multiple buildings, we have 450 buildings that we're responsible for statewide. When you start adding all these buildings into it, you get more and more and more onto your network, and it's like, hey, can't monitor everything. So that, and then the visualization, being able to go in, we did .1x for our workstation devices, but all of our IoT, our printers, we were doing MAB policies, MAC address bypass policies. And this is a printer, but we've had to go in and manually do it because the MAC addresses for the NICs were coming in, oh, these are HP devices. Is it an HP laptop, or is it an HP printer? Or is it an HP laptop that's not doing .1x? So we think it's a printer at the time. And we were able to go in and clarify our devices a lot better, come in and say, hey, these are printers, these are building secure cameras, these are some of our UGF, these are some of our seismic monitors that are out on the network, because one of our agencies, they do a lot with watching for earthquakes.
Yeah, so let's, so I guess I didn't ask that first. So kind of talk about your organization a bit, because you guys are kind of unique, being you're a statewide IT, and
right.
You have a diversity of agencies underneath you. So what are some of the challenges with sort of that multi-agency approach, and how have you got some visibility into that?
Well, one of the challenges is I work for Department of Technology Services. We handle all of the state of Utah's executive branch. So that's public safety, Department of Transportation, Human Services, Health Department, and the list goes on. And every one of these individual agencies is really almost its own company. They have their own management structure, they have their own way of doing things, they have their own deployment for their devices, and a lot of them have their own audits. State of Utah has, I mean, if there's going to be an audit, HIPAA, PHI, State of Utah has it, or one of my agencies has it, or multiple ones. So one of the challenges is, how do you find all these devices? How do we make sure that Human Services devices are different than the Health Department devices? How do you make sure that we're applying PCI, correct PCI procedures, and we can pass the PCI audit over here, but we're not as worried about it over on these devices?
Okay, so that kind of like led into the next challenge. So you have all these different agencies. Mm-hmm. ABC, Alcohol Beverage Commission, as well as your Department of Health, as well as your tax.
Right.
And so what was motivating your segmentation at the state of Utah?
Well, we do a really good job segmenting our server side, but down in the campus with the client world, it's a little more tricky. And some of our buildings are nice because it's just one agency, but there's a lot of buildings that it's multi-agency, where we go into a building, we have 3, 4, 5 different agencies, and this agency has FTI audit they have to pass. This agency does.
Federal tax information.
Federal tax information. But even there, the one that's doing a federal tax information audit, only a third of their machines really are subject to that audit. The rest of the machines aren't subject to the audit. And if all those machines are together in the same segment, then all the machines need to be subject to the same audit. So it becomes one where segmentation is important because, one, we can narrow the scope of the audit. If you can narrow the scope of the audit, great. The other thing about it is controls. If I have all of these devices all together, how do we put in a workstation? So we're doing DHCP. Unless you're going to keep tables of this machine gets this IP, this machine gets this IP, you're going to expect that machine could have that one's IP that it had yesterday. So how do you start building firewall rules unless you're doing some type of segmentation? So when in our early segmentation plans, it was, here's our VLANs, these are our FTI devices, these are our non-FTI devices, and maybe this is the other agency one. And hopefully nobody does a change in the closet. Hopefully the building doesn't realign their cubicles and now you guys sit over here and you guys sit over there. And as we've experienced, that happens all the time, that they change.
Okay. So you had, and worked with Jordy a lot. He's one of our better customers references. He also comes to our technical advisory board. But you have a couple of different things. So you had like PCI in your tax agency. They also had like federal, because they take payments. You had federal tax information in a variety of agencies, your tax department, but also your workforce for things like social services.
Right.
And then you had protected health information as well, and your health and human services. And then you have people that are just selling alcohol, and they don't need to be involved with any of this other important stuff to go on.
They kind of do, because PCI, we have multiple, anywhere that credit cards are taken, PCI is an issue. And we have multiple agencies that take PCI, and every one of the agencies has their own merchant ID. So in a PCI audit, we're not looking at the entire state of Utah. We're looking over at alcohol beverage control, or we're only looking at the tax commission for those.
Okay.
And just like FTI, the federal tax stuff, human services has FTI, tax commission has FTI, workforce services has FTI, but we don't want workforce services and human services to all be bundled underneath the same audit.
Exactly.
And God forbid you get a breach, you don't want that breach to cover all of those entities. You want to be able to narrow the scope of it.
Excellent, excellent. And so before you had eyeSegment, and you talked about this earlier this year at our technical advisory board, you had a whole strategy of how you were going to do segmentation before you saw our eyeSegment product. And so what were your plan there, and what were some of the challenges with that plan?
So in our plan there, and we were using Forescout in that plan, but we didn't have the eyeSegment product. The plan for it was, we got separate VLANs. We've detected these devices belong to health department, or these devices belong over tax commission and these agencies, and we will automatically move them to these VLANs. We will automatically create firewall rules or security policies and apply down against the endpoint based on what VLAN or what agency that they exist to. So we did have a pretty strong segmentation plan going forward.
Yes, and were there challenges with the implementation of that plan? We've talked about this. You had Meraki, but multiple network vendors, right? You were switching to Meraki. You had a legacy.
We have, on the Layer 2 side, we have Meraki, we have the HP ProCurve line, we have the Cisco line, so we have multiple Layer 2 vendors, we have multiple firewall vendors, Cisco ASA, Palo Altos, Fortinet into the environment. So yeah, like any big IT shop, we have multiple vendors, multiple types of equipment on our network side. And again, there's the issue where you get right down into the details. This is this type of device, this type of device. Do they belong on the same VLAN? If they don't, how do you determine that they're truly different devices? How do I ensure that, okay, I got this VLAN separated that has access to PHI data, how do I only allow PHI devices on? And if the PHI devices are there, how do I watch the network and make sure that I don't have rogue things popping up, because maybe this device has been labeled as PHI, so it's allowed there, but it's out there talking to stuff that segment shouldn't be able to.
And your strategy at the time, correct me if I'm wrong, but your strategy at the time was a lot of re-IPing, a lot of re-VLANing, a lot of manual work, hard coding your infrastructure to this segmentation model.
That's correct. When we go into a site, we would say, okay, this site had a flat network. We're going to build 4 VLANs for segmentation, and then we're going to have to go in and re-IP these machines here, these machines here, these machines here. And traditionally, firewall rules have been open to allow just the broad range, because a lot of times application developers we want our application to work. Okay, the easiest way for it to work is an IP any on the firewall. Hey, it works, we're all good. But that's not a practice we should adhere to.
Okay, so then let's now move on to the future. So this is what you were doing, your challenges, you had a plan in place that you were working to execute. Then you went and used eyeSegment. So first of all, sort of like, what made you realize that eyeSegment was valuable, and how quick was it to get that realization?
Okay, so the piece where I started to see value from eyeSegment was where I was able to start looking at a visual graph and come in and say, these devices are communicating to these points on the network. And that's kind of big, because that's a validation. Yeah, we can go through logs all day, we can go check, hey, my firewall rules are in place, but a lot of our client sides, the firewall rules, unless someone wants to go and get down to nitty-gritty rules on outbound traffic, the firewall rules are going to be, hey, that workstation can get to anything out onto the network, and then we'll go back on the server side and block pieces. Well, now we can start looking and saying, okay, this classification of device is talking out to these servers, or it's talking out to the internet. It's talking to places that it shouldn't be. It's sourcing traffic from the device to places that we don't want it to be.
But in your environment, you'd already leveraged iSight quite a bit to add the business context. So you knew that this Windows PC, it's just a random Windows PC, was part of tax, or part of ABC, or Department of Health. Right. So then when you went to look at eyeSegment, you were immediately able to see the agency-to-agency communication, because you had already done that classification work.
So I'm going to jump ahead to one of the questions. One of the questions is, and I'm going to use an example, because that answers this question right now. And I'm not going to use agency names. We had one agency where they have servers. We'd identified their servers, and we're seeing traffic from their client workstations going up to that server. Okay, that's expected. But then I started to see traffic from other agencies going to this exact same server back behind this one agency zone. And it's like, that shouldn't be. Why does that traffic exist? Looking into it, I discovered that a while back, someone in the agency decided, hey, we need to get an inventory count on all of our machines in that agency. And the best way to do that is to deploy an agent that talks to a server, and we'll deploy it through a GPO tied to the technician's accounts. And then somewhere along the line, they started sharing those technicians around, and those technicians, when they would go in, that agent would now start to move around our network to other agencies that it shouldn't really be. Now, at the end of the day, this wasn't a big deal because of the nature of it, but it was an example on traffic that shouldn't be, and immediately being able to see and say, that's bad, that's wrong, how did this happen? And it wasn't a breach event, but it was an event that came around because we were trying to collect data, and one of the methodologies that was put in place to collect that data helped spread an application around.
It was a broken business process.
Broken business process.
Yeah, and so this is, this is interesting. One, I really like this one, because this one took a couple of weeks of pondering on while we were looking at this. So day one, we put it on, and we saw, for lack of a better term, a less regulated agency talking to a more regulated agency. That was day one.
Right.
And we had that thing, and we said, oh, this less regulated agency is talking to a more regulated agency. I remember you went and investigated that and said, well, IT shared services said they ran out of space, and they just put this server over here, and don't worry about it. And then as we went along over the next couple of weeks, it turned out that many less regulated agencies were talking to this one regulated agency. And that's where you had to do this dig in. And it was around a client deployment, right? An agent deployment.
Right.
So a GPO that's pushing an agent, and it's pushing an agent to a bunch of client workstations that are not in this agency.
Correct.
And so this is, again, like you said, there was no breach, there's no announcement, you didn't see a press release from the state of Utah
Well,
on this,
and it
right?
wasn't actually talking to any of the regulated servers.
Wasn't talking to a regulated server.
But it's traffic out of the norm. And where I really got into this is it's that ability to see traffic out of the norm that will help you determine, hey, there may be a problem on my network. There may be intrusion on my network. If someone's going to go out and start probing my network for points, we'll see the traffic and dots will start to appear on the graph, for lack of a better word for it. And then somebody will be like, unless there's some automated policy, somebody will be like, hey, this is great. And automation is great. I love the plan to get to automation, but that's a long-range goal. That's, for us, right now I have individuals watching the network, and for me with eyeSegment, this ability to come in and say, this traffic shouldn't be, and then send somebody to go and investigate it before waiting for a breach event and someone to come back and say, somebody hit a server, data's out on the wild, you guys need to go look through 30 days of logs and try to figure out, did this really happen or not?
No.
That's a real problem. Knowing is the first step to automation anyway. So even if you started to automate, you still need to know what to automate.
Right.
So you were using Forescout as a visibility to give you, so it's a see, think, act. You see something, then the policy engine gives you the ability to think about it and make a decision, and then it goes to act. Go. You're still choosing to do the act as a manual process.
Yes.
That's where you are. But that doesn't mean you can't automate that last part.
And eventually we do want to automate it to the point where, hey, you see something like this, automatically create firewall rules or break devices on the network and stop their access. But very first is that, see what's happening on my network. Where is this machine actually talking to out on my network?
Yep.
What ports is it talking to? Because a lot of times we get the developers in, on what ports do you need open? Well, we're not sure. Let's try a few.
Yeah. I think the reality is too, a lot of your devices won't be automatable. Like they're just legacy things that are 10, 20 years old, and you're not going to get a budget to upgrade them. It comes back to what I said earlier about paving over the network and putting in all these modern devices is a luscious, rich idea, full of emotional, makes me well up thinking how great that would be, but that's not the reality.
Yeah. We still have temperature monitor devices out there that have been on the network for 20 years, and they'll probably be on for 20 more years because they're doing a job, they haven't broke, and there isn't a replacement for them.
Yeah.
So before you were really focused on this sort of VLAN, Meraki policy, Meraki VLAN, different VLANs, different agencies, re-IPing, you have 4 Class Bs on the public internet, 7 Class Bs on the public internet, re-IPing your whole environment. What is your strategy now that you have the visibility with eyeSegment? Your first step before was re-IP, re-VLAN.
Right.
What's your first step now that you have the visibility?
Well, one of the things that we're working on right now is we're still looking at doing the segmentation when we get into a site. Okay, it's a flat network. We do want to do physical segmentation because, honestly, when an auditor comes in, that right there is a big thing. Oh, you've segmented all these devices from everybody else. There's a stateful firewall between it and the rest of the network. Okay, that's a bigger win. But more than that, we're taking devices and now classifying them in groups, saying that these devices, they belong to this agency, but these are the regulated devices, these are the non-regulated, these are these type of ones. And if we're seeing them on the same network, dropping security policies onto them based on a little bit of how their traffic is going. So right now, we can say, okay, this device has shown up into the network. We can see it's trying to talk out here. It shouldn't be there. So we're going to restructure it, remove it to somewhere else based on its traffic or block it on their traffic. And the big thing on that is being able to use the traffic to classify the device. We're still really doing the same similar type of segmentation at the end of the day in saying that we want these physical devices segmented, but we're using part of what we're seeing from their traffic communication as a way of saying, this is where you're going to go, this is who you are, or we're going to block you from the network, do a ServiceNow ticket, and alert the world to it.
So you still have the same segmentation goals. You still have the same segmentation requirements. You still have the same need to respond and control. Put in an actual control, as you mentioned, so PCI audit, you have an actual control there.
Right.
But you're able to do that in a way now that's, I'm putting words in your mouth here, but much more responsive. So if you see an issue, you can open a ticket. You don't have to be on the right VLAN. If you see an issue or you see a device, you don't maybe need to go make a new physical VLAN for it. You can just dynamically apply a Meraki group policy just to that one endpoint.
Right.
And yes, long term, you want more VLANs. You need to re-IP. I've seen your segments. They're gnarly, so you want to redo all that anyway.
We do.
But where you are right now, you're able to get your visibility segmentation. You're able to respond dynamically, ServiceNow, tickets, SOC, and you're able to apply a dynamic control to your high-risk assets.
We can. And really, it's that traffic that we're seeing, who's talking to where, that gives a validation also to say, this is proved. This is doing what it's supposed to be doing onto our network. Because before, we trusted that this is a regulated network. Everybody on that is talking just to regulated servers and nowhere else. But now we have these devices that suddenly they're talking out to the internet on ports that they shouldn't be. And because that segment has an outbound rule allowing, and our edge network firewall has an outbound rule allowing, they can get out and source traffic out to the internet. So
that's great. The audit use case as well, because even in your earlier example where we were talking about regulated agencies and less regulated agencies, even though there was no breach or loss of data or no failure, that example, you did breach one of your regulated zones.
Yes.
You expected you had a regulated zone, and then you saw an eyeSegment that in fact there was traffic breaching out of a regulated zone. Again, not an incident,
right,
but still validation of the assurance that are my zones that I think I have working the way.
Are they locked down as tight as they need to be?
Right. So from the whole thing, from the pre-visibility, what should my segments be, to the design phase, to then the monitoring phase as well.
And because we're grouping the devices, we can also say, okay, it's okay if we wanted to. We could say it's okay that they're together on the same segment. This device isn't. If this device that's grouped as a regulated device tries to talk out, we're going to break them, cause problems to them where their neighboring device that isn't regulated is okay to talk out to the internet, because we're seeing these traffics. We're going to do some adaptive policy, adaptive firewall rules to it, or alert to it. For us as a state, our end goal is to not truly have those together on the same segment, just because even though we're doing firewall rules, DACLs down onto them, or group policies on the Meraki side down onto them, it's still better for an audit to come in and say, yep, there's nothing that is non-regulated on that segment period.
Yeah, and that goes back, I think, to the original diagram that Tom was showing around. You want to stop that east-west. Mm-hmm. So even in their same agency, similar posture, et cetera, but you have two devices that are slightly different, you want to stop that east-west. You don't want them on the same VLAN or the same broadcast domain. And that's in addition to saying, hey, this device can't access my data center, only needs to access the data center resources.
Right. Now, an interesting thought to this, too, is sometimes with the segmentation, well, if they're on the same VLAN, that traffic is not going to move past an actual firewall itself. But because we're pulling net flow data from our switch environment, we see the traffic and we see this device. So let's say we have a regulated device and a non-regulated device on the same network segment. It's not going to go past a firewall, but if we have that data, the net flow data like we do for the state, we will see that non-regulated device talking to that regulated device and be able to say, hey, that's a problem. And break we could disable their switch port, do
and you have actions down right
Yeah,
now,
there's other
only on
actions you
that
can do
layer
to that.
2, not only at the firewall and that boundary transit, but also at that layer 2 for that
Right.
intra-VLAN communication or to make separate
Right.
VLANs. And that's a great point that you had that visibility there. So you not only have visibility just at the choke points, you also have visibility down at your switching infrastructure at the basically that layer 2 connectivity point.
So I have a question. You're talking, especially since you use the product,
Yes.
and we've talked a lot about over the last couple of days about just alert fatigue, and you guys have talked about it.
Mm-hmm.
So you say you will get notified. How do you get notified in these cases? Like, is it? Yeah, okay.
That's an excellent question. That's actually one of the things that I'm struggling with right now because I have a full SOC full of people. How do I get the data to those individuals in the SOC so they can quickly know, hey, here's a problem, here's something going on the network? As I believe you'll see in the demo, you'll see the matrix back there, and that's something that we're working on in the state, how to make it make sense to those individuals. Because for notification, yeah, I can open a ServiceNow ticket, I can kick off emails back to individuals, I can do syslog triggers, so I can get all this information back there, but there is that information overload. Hey, I got 50 emails in the last 5 minutes, I'm just going to delete them because it's just another false positive from there. So one of the things that I'm trying to do is put together a matrix that can be quickly viewed by SOC individuals and say, oh, that traffic shouldn't be, that dot shouldn't be, we need to go investigate that, and something that can be thrown up onto a screen that people take a look at. Now, also putting the alert notifications back in the back end where, okay, we're going to open a ticket, throw it over to somebody, put an email, and possibly later on automate, hey, this shouldn't be, we're just going to block you from the network to begin with, but put a quick visualization that they can look at and say, hey, that looks normal. Oh, that quickly doesn't look normal.
And I didn't get the follow-up of this. We did on one of our calls where you were saying on the matrix you had violations that were Telnet. Telnet, any Telnet that's happening in the environment, violations. And at the end of that call, you said you were going to go get your SOC to work on that. So what was the outcome of that? Did the SOC work on those?
I have gotten a couple individuals involved, and actually it's gone back over to our NOC, our network operations team, where we need to lock down some of the Telnet because we don't really want to be doing Telnet, and some of it is to printers.
Oh.
So it's
interesting. So but that's an example of where already today, sort of during the beta, you were able to get an alert that was actionable for your SOC team or your NOC team. We have Telnet in the environment.
Right. And the alert to it was using that same matrix, flipping a switch that said, show me where Telnet is, and then having dots show up for the points of communication. And that, again, is a little different between, okay, I'm getting emails on the back end through that to, okay, I'm going to actively look. Oh, this shouldn't be.
This agency is doing Telnet to this other agency.
You're conducting a pogrom against Telnet.
Yeah, basically.
I don't care for Telnet. I mean,
Yes. I'm sure it's mother. I'm sure it's got a mother, and
I would prefer everybody SSH into things. I would prefer if you're going to do SNMP, you do SNMP version 3.
Yeah.
Of course, I do live in. It's not reality fully, but we're working.
You can't take a pogrom to SNMP v2 yet,
Yes.
but
Not quite.
you're ready to go. You've got the knights and ready to go out and conduct the religious war on such things, I imagine.
Yes. There you go.
Well, those,
I brought the mortar metaphor all the way around.
That was amazing.
those were the topics I wanted to talk with you about. Jordy, was there something you wanted to mention, or you guys have already been asking questions. Were there other items?
No, I'm good. We're just have only 40 minutes for your presentation, unless there's any other questions.
I guess the question there is, it's literally you're using your incumbent legendary, I call legacy legendary. It sounds so much better
Heritage.
to say it that way, right? Yeah. So all of your legendary assets, you're basically just using all of those, and Forescout went on the top.
Yes.
And using that, you're then able to micro-segment by using the available control points in your network. Now, that may still mean that you need to go and create VLANs and re-IP address things to create zones of control
Correct.
and domains. And effectively, that's your micro-segment. The VLAN becomes a micro-segment in reality, I guess?
Yes. Yeah.
And then
the
the
Moroccan
firewalls
policy.
get a better level of granular. You get better visibility into the network, so that lets you configure the rules better. So really what you did was you took what was in your network and started to actually make it work.
Right.
As opposed to sort of,
Right. One of the big things, and it's just that, I have I have a Cisco switch. Let's say we want to do a control, a security policy. For a Meraki, we're going to tie a security policy to a device port. For a Cisco or ProCurve switch, we're going to have to SSH right in and put in a DACL, a downloadable ACL against it. And I have one thing that I can do with Forescout is I can automatically do an API call into the Meraki dashboard and put that policy against this device as it moves around. Or I can do an SSH right into the switch and put the DACL down against a ProCurve switch or against a Cisco switch. So I didn't have to suddenly go in and make my environment one type of vendor.
Yes.
Because that's not going to happen.
Well, that's not going to happen then realistically. But I think the flip side of this is a lot of people are attached to microsegmentation being an overlay technology. And yeah, probably over time, overlays will be where we all go because there's a certain amount of sense to it. But there's a path here which says, I've got all this stuff, but it's just not well done. And automation remains hard. Again, the legendary assets are often automation resistant or even automation proof. And realistic manually is only the way that you go. So this lets you effectively get most of the benefits of a microsegmentation concept without actually going to, throwing everything out and trying to find millions of dollars to replace it and change everything around, right?
Yes, I would agree with that.
Is that a fair summary?
That's a fair summary.
Okay.
Jordy, quick question. You've been an existing Forescout customer, so you had iSight and iControl deployed.
Yes.
Give us a sense of how long, how much effort it took for you to start getting value from iSegment, like from the time that Neil got on a Zoom and helped you install the license to, where you were getting value.
So that is a really interesting, loaded question because the
I'm not sure
time
if it's good or bad.
the time to turn it on, because we had sensors already deployed out onto our network. We had our counteract boxes already placed. We have a centralized model, but we also have a mix of distributed where I have sensors out around my wide area network that are watching choke points. The time to turn it on was, I think, 15 minutes when we put it on, started pushing the data into the cloud services. We leveraged what I had done in the past, and then we added NetFlow data into it from our Meraki environment, and we were seeing traffic from the get-go. And actually seeing value from it from the get-go, because now I'm like, oh, I got this traffic, I got this traffic, I got these things happening. The reason I say that's kind of a loaded question, though, is part of it is our design. Remember, these are traffic cameras out on your network. If the traffic goes along the freeway, and I have because we deal with Department of Transportation, I'm going to use traffic cameras in this. If I have a camera watching the on-ramp and a camera watching the path and the off-ramp, I see the car get on the freeway, go across, and then I can list on the dashboard. But if I don't have anything watching the back roads and the car takes the back road out and around, I don't know it's out onto my network. So part of it took the leverage of, hey, we had this in place. We were doing port mirroring. We had devices capable of doing NetFlow, which most places do have devices capable of doing NetFlow, to get that data, to get that visibility. The other piece is when I start getting that visibility, it's like, oh my gosh, I could display it better. I could get better results from this data. I need to go in and redo how my policies are set up on the back end to make things more clear, to make it so that my team in the SOC can quickly see on this graph, we have a problem here, how do we resolve it? So initial implementation is quick. The initial pulling of data and seeing the value was immediate, but it also made a whole lot of extra work for me because
every meeting we're on, every conversation I have with Jordy, he goes, "Oh gosh, now I have more work I have to go do."
we've redesigned our policy groups. Well, we've redesigned our groups. I'm on almost my 8 redesign now, just because I'm learning more. We can do it better. We can make better choices, show the data better.
Yeah.
And this is, and you'll get this in the demo, but what this is when customers start, especially some of our customers that may be transitioning, they start and they got like, well, manage Windows Server. So he had Department of Health servers. Well, he's got 40, 50, 100 different types of servers in Department of Health servers. So what are all these servers? What are all these workstations? What are all these clients? And Forescout can help him do it, and it does it, but but he has to go do it. He might have to talk to someone. He might have to do something.